morning, First Congregational Church, and good morning, Langsburg community. This is Dr. Tom coming at you from my front yard. Welcome to our online service. Today, we are going to be in our Ordinary Revolution series, part 2, Mark chapter 4 today, where Jesus is talking about some seeds and sowing seeds and planting seeds and reaping some harvests, and then he's going to be talking about a mustard seed and a really big tree that grows out of it, which is why I'm standing in front of our really big, monstrous maple tree today. We're going to do some exploration of that bad boy right there, see if we can figure out how old this tree is. I've got a little formula I'm going to share with you, and we're going to estimate its age today and look at this Mark chapter 4 passage. But before we go there, let's prepare our hearts to encounter God today, and we shall see you in a minute. Peace. All right, this is our monster maple tree that's in our front yard, the one that you saw in the introduction. And you can kind of see that this fella is really, really monstrous. We'll do a little bit of a pan up here. You can see that it's really, really a large tree. One of my favorite trees. Now this tree looks beautiful in the fall. It turns all yellow and gold. But this monster tree started from one of these little helicopter guys right here. This, look at that big, that little tiny helicopter thingy right there. It fell to the ground at some point, and boom, we got this tree here. Now, the way that you look into an estimate of the tree's age is a little bit of a math formula. I am not a math wizard, but I did some calculations. Now what you got to do is you got to take the circumference of the trunk, as this beast of a thing right here. You got to take the circumference of the trunk at 4.5 feet up. So like that's like at my waist because I'm 6'5". Okay, so circumference, I got my measuring tape out here, and we are running at about 120 inches all the way around for the circumference of this tree. Now you got to find the diameter of the tree, so you divide the circumference by 3.14, which is pi, and then you get the diameter, which is just the direct across of the tree, the measurement right across. Now that measurement, I can't math on the fly like awesome like that, so that one, it ended up being the diameter ended up being 38.21 inches across. Now there is a growth rate of the sugar maple trees, which this one is. So you take 38.21 and the growth rate of the sugar maple is 5. So you multiply those together and you get your estimated year. And the estimated year of this tree, the age of this tree, is 191 years old. That's really old. That's like a long time ago. That's before many things. So 191-year-old tree. Now it started from that little teeny tiny little seed, and now it's this huge monster tree that has just endured snow, and it's endured ice, it's endured wind. We had straight line winds about 10 years ago here that measured about 85 miles an hour. This tree is still here. All the branches are still here. We've had ice hang from this tree inch thick. It's still here. We had snow, like 3 feet of snow. It's still here. What was this tree's growth plan? I mean, did it fall down as a seed and somebody said, I want to plant a maple tree right here? So here's the plan of how we're going to grow this maple tree. We're going to, cultivate ground and then fertilize. And I don't think so. A lot of trees, the seed just falls down, and then maybe even a bird like plants the tree here, and then it just grows and grows and grows. Now, the interesting thing about this tree is that it has a DNA structure, because everything living has DNA in it. This tree is alive. And this tree, the DNA is what makes it a sugar maple. But the story of this tree enduring all of these storms and adapting its self to all of the circumstances around it, it makes it our maple tree in our front yard. It's not just a maple tree. This is our maple tree, and it's beautiful. It had endurance and adaptation, and now it is our tree. It's this tree, and there is no other tree like this one right here in our front yard. And it didn't have a growth plan. Nobody set out and said, we're gonna plant this tree, and then 191 years ago, it's gonna have shade for some bald preacher guy. Cars drive by in front of them. That wasn't the plan. It's just here, and it grew, and it just happened. That's what Jesus is telling the story about today in Mark chapter 4. So there's a question here that Jesus opens up with in this chapter, in this parable. It is, what is the kingdom of God like? He asks this question quite a bit throughout the Gospels. And to answer the question that he asks, he does not seek to give us definitions, plans, and all of these things. Instead, he tells stories, and stories that are intentionally confusing, stories that are intentionally difficult to wrap our minds around, stories that are radically different from one another. And he asks the question, what is the kingdom of God like? And then he'll tell a story. And then if you take all those stories and compare them together, you just get something so broad, a description, very confusing, not really simple and straightforward. So it's tough to answer that question, which is why he's using, parables and stories and illustrations. But how we answer this question does determine a lot, because our understanding of what the kingdom of God is determines what our faith is for and how we exercise it in the world. So it determines a whole lot, and then we build our entire lives around this vision. Even if we are, agnostic or atheist or even not a Christian, everyone has a view of the world that they think this is what it ought to be. And then they build their lives around that vision of what it ought to be. And Jesus here tells us this is what the kingdom of God is like, and he offers a whole bunch of confusing stories to illustrate what it's like. Maybe the confusion itself is what it's like. But he does not offer any speeches, any kind of social or economic or political plan that says, well, if we just adopt this way of being in the world, or governing ourselves, or using our monies, or he doesn't go down those roads. He doesn't even offer a religious plan as far as what religion was in the day. Instead, he tells these stories, and these stories are like they're little windows into what something so broad is like, and leaves lots and lots and lots of room for our different speculations and understandings. But one thing it can boil down to is that there is a created intention for everything in all of creation. It was created with an intended purpose in mind that is not the intention of the thing is not wrapped up in itself and in its individualness. The world was created with different ecosystems and biodiversities in it, and everything is dependent upon everything else. So this created intention of the thing also wraps into the mutual flourishing of the things around it. So the created intention plus a mutual flourishing of its environment is something that is good and true and beautiful, and that's something very close to what Jesus is getting at with what is the kingdom of God like. The next verse he goes on to say that it's like this farmer who scatters seed in a field and then goes to bed. Well, that's weird. That's what the kingdom of God is like. It's like scattering seed and then going to bed. Now this word for scattering of the seed is not the same word for like the sowing of the seed, or the I'm going to go down and plant this row of tomatoes or something. What this scattering is like, if you go out to plant grass seed, you're just grabbing in the pouch and you're just spreading as far and fast and as liberally as you can. So it's like the word here is casting without care of where it lands. That's what it's like. The kingdom of God is like this seed that has been sown into the world and cast far and wide, not really caring where it lands. Not saying I'm going to choose this person and not that person, or this group and not that group. The kingdom of God is a created intention of everything and everyone, that when it enters into that intention, then the things around it flourish. And that seed has been spread far and wide without a care for what group or what nation or what language or socioeconomic status or political affiliation it lands in. It's radical. And this is a radical understanding of the day, because they believed that the kingdom of God was to be in the temple system and held by the scribes, Pharisees, and priests. And the kingdom of God was divvied out if you could afford to pay for their services. It was divvied out to those who were able to have money to afford to be there. So this casting without care and liberally is a radical understanding of what they believe the kingdom of God was. The kingdom of God is for me and my tribe and my thing, and it's held in this small little building, and we visit it once a year. And here Jesus is saying it's like this seed that's been radically dispersed without care of where it lands, and it's so generous and generative that it just goes everywhere, all over the place, and is not held in authority by a select few in a certain place. It's planted everywhere and in everyone and in everything. It's everywhere, all around. So then this farmer who scatters the seed everywhere goes to bed, gets up the next day and looks out and he's like, oh look, there's sprouts out there. He's kind of surprised. And then it grows, and the farmer just doesn't really know how that grows. It just grew overnight. So there's no growth plan here. He just threw seed out there and then went to bed, and then woke up the next day, and then there's little sproutlings coming out of the ground. Is sproutlings a word? I think it is. It is now. Thomas Merton has approved of sproutlings. So this seed, when it makes contact with soil, it just grows, because that's the nature of the seed, and that's the nature of the DNA of the seed. Everything that the seed needs to become a plant is held in this seed. It's a DNA. Everything it needs is already there. It just needs receptive soil. You can't throw seed onto the concrete driveway and expect it to grow, unless it lands in one of those cracks, and then it gets down into some soil somewhere and then pops up a little dandelion through the crack in the driveway. But other than that, you can't grow things on rocks. You can't grow it on concrete. You can't grow it on like slabs of wood. Like, you need receptive, aerated, fertile soil. So this soil, it says that the roots are happening in the dark, out of sight, where the farmer doesn't see it. He doesn't know how it's happening. He just knows that when seed meets soil, plants happen. Soil produces crops all by itself, he says in verse 28. It's automatically, the Greek word there actually can be kind of used automatically. It just happens. And that seed has the ability, it did before it landed on the soil, that seed had the ability to make bread, because we're talking about wheat seed here in this parable. But that seed had the ability to make bread and feed, but instead it was taken and cast onto the soil in faith and hope that it would sprout up and become something useful and multiply itself. This last verse, verse 29, it says, when the crop permits, then the harvest happens. And this word permits is really interesting. It caught my attention as I was diving into some of the original language of this. This is the same verb that Jesus, that is used of Jesus when he hands himself over to be tried, to be arrested, tried, and crucified. It's the exact same verb for that. So this crop yields itself over to the soil, and it's like this picture of the death and resurrection process. This death and resurrection process happens when the seed permits itself to be grown, and then permits itself to be harvested, yields itself over, and it's the death and resurrection process that Christ goes through. But it's also the death and resurrection process that we're invited to, because our sanctification, our holiness, our maturity, our created intention is wrapped up in our ability to practice and follow Christ's death and resurrection process. If we're fighting the death and resurrection process in our own life and not willing to be fertile soil and change as we need to change, then we get stuck and we become hard, and then when seed hits our soil, it just kind of dries up, and it's like throwing it on the concrete. Nothing happens. So there is this giving of ourselves for the sake of others that we see in the person of Jesus, that we see in what this grain of wheat will do. It will grow up and give itself. Now Jesus is the ultimate death and resurrection process. We can't do it as perfectly as he did, but he's the one who paved the way for us to do it in all the ways that we can, and fills in all the gaps for the ways that we can't. He almost like healed that death and resurrection process of its ability to tear apart the soul. So now we can adopt these death and resurrection process living patterns ourselves, in hopes that we become these grains that offer bread to a hungry world in need of sustenance. So Jesus immediately goes into this parable from the seed sown to the acorn grown. It's like this, well, the Message calls it an acorn that grows into a big tree, because that's something that a lot of us can identify with. The Bible uses mustard seed that grows into a large plant. I don't get any mustard seeds around here. That's a lilac bush, another lilac bush over there, that's a walnut tree over here, and I believe there's some pine trees over there. But no mustard trees growing around here. I don't know what a mustard tree even looks like. I had to look it up. So this mustard seed, what does it mean? That it's hard to just pin down an answer, because he meant to be confusing. So we're meant to reflect on this. We're meant to, ask questions about this. Maybe do some explorations around it and come up with some reflective thoughts on this. And I did that this morning as I was thinking through a mustard seed. So I don't have this is what it means, exegetically or historically or culturally. What I got is a few reflections as I did some study and prayer on this. And mustard has the Greek word for mustard has its roots in the word to sting or to irritate. Isn't that wonderful? Like stinging nettle, you wipe a stinging nettle on your arm and you get all these bumps because there's these little like venom thing. I didn't know that plants had venom, but they sting you like bees, and then it irritates your arm and you get this red rash. Well, the root for the word mustard is actually to sting or to irritate. So what does this mean? I don't know, but perhaps the phrase "death, where is your sting" comes to mind from the Psalms, that is brought into the New Testament to talk about Christ's resurrection. You know, out of death and resurrection process comes generative, generous life. Perhaps it is that the kingdom of God will be an irritant. I like that, irritant. An irritant to the powers of the world through this established community of the people of God living in a different manner. Communities that are radically loving and radically very different from how the world operates, that loves people not based upon what they can do and give, but based upon just the intrinsic value they have as human beings holding the image of God. Perhaps there are irritants to the powers of the world by holding those powers accountable to higher standards of love and empathy and justice and fairness, and not just whatever makes the markets go up or whatever makes our military might get stronger or gives certain groups power over other groups. But perhaps the kingdom of God is not meant to collude with the powers of the world, but hold them to higher standards of love and justice in this world, and be the irritant that way. Perhaps it's just the idea of something small becoming really large, a little tiny mustard seed growing into a large 15-foot tall tree. Perhaps it means that we're embracing our insignificance in faith, and through faithful endurance and adaptation in this world, we become this shrub that you just can't get rid of, because mustard seed just permeates the environment and you can't get rid of mustard seed. Once it's sown, it's there and it doesn't go away. It's like ivy, it just never stops, no matter how many times you get rid of it. Mustard seeds actually don't grow into trees. I just found this out. But there's no such thing as a mustard tree. They grow into bushes. But Jesus says, when Matthew and Luke take this parable here and adapt it for their theological purposes, they add that it didn't just grow into a large plant, but it grows into a tree. And that would have confused their listeners, because mustard seeds don't grow into trees. We don't get tomato trees. We don't get other trees. I'm at a blank right now. We don't get like raspberry trees. They're bushes, and those bushes permeate everything. So why did they pick tree of all things? That's incorrect botanically. I don't know what the word is now, but it's incorrect. They don't grow into trees. So perhaps we're sowing, expecting one thing to happen. We're going to get this large, a large bush-like object that's 15 feet tall and like 40 feet wide, that just looks like a unkept hedgerow. That's what we planted, and we had expected that, but instead we got a tree pop up out of here. And this tree has thick branches and birds come and nest, and it has a use to it, not just to be a kind of a hedgerow or a shrub-row, but now there's the people of the day expected the Messiah to come and reform the nation, the Hebrew nation, and establish them as the world superpower, and then everyone else would be subdued underneath them. That was the expectation of the coming Messiah. Jesus did not do that. He instead came, and instead of doing this shrub that they expected, the reformation of the people of God to become the superpower, he instead planted a tree that included all people, all nations. He talked to Gentiles, he talked to Romans, he talked to even the Samaritans. So perhaps planting the seed, expecting the bush, and getting a tree instead is something. So these are intentionally confusing so that we have to wrestle with them and think about them. But at the end of the day, whatever God is up to in you, whatever God is up to around you, what these are pointing to is the endurance and adaptation that we're capable of doing throughout whatever we face, is what establishes the kingdom of God within us and around us. And there's a lot of darkness, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of, is this doing any good? Is anything happening? Is anything working? As the farmer planted a seed and waited overnight in the dark, and then when the day came, he saw that there was growth happening. The roots grow under the ground where you can't see, and then they pop up blades, and those blades are pretty useless until they mature into something a little bit more full, and they get the head, and then they get the grains on them. So I guess what we're going to land on here is that you will see some blades shoot up through the barren soil when the sun rises.
Blessing that holds a nest in its branches. The emptiness that you have been holding for such a long season now. That ache in your chest that goes with you night and day. In your sleeping, your rising. Think of this not as a mere hollow, the void left from the life that has leached out of you. Think of it like this, as the space being prepared for the seed. Think of it as your earth that dreams of the branches the seed contains. Think of it as your heart making ready to welcome the nest its branches will hold. By Jan Richardson.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today for our online service. Thank you. I tried to stay out of the sunshine. You see that glare on my head? This is the shadow of my chimney right here, and I've been moving with it, staying cool and staying unglaringly in your picture. But thank you for being here. If you'd like to partner with us in a financial capacity, down here at the bottom of your page there is a link that is being shown. You can type that into your Google bar and set up a one-time or recurring gift. We would love your support as we seek to be a community of hope, help, and healing anywhere that we can reach. If you want to be part of this community, you can like and follow our page. We have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe to that, and you'll be notified when we go live, announcements, different events that we do here online. And whenever we do an online service, you'll get a notification, and you can kind of follow along, see what we're doing. So we will see you next week for week number 3. It's going to be Father's Day next week. Week number 3 of the Ordinary Revolution for Ordinary Time. And we will see you then. Have a good day.